Entrance. These were the two air ducts that became a servant's room. And then what was left in between these spaces is actually what became the living spaces. Next, please. And then could you go back one slide? So what you see in black is the sense of, if you see any of these houses in this harsh region, there's a very strong sense of core and strong sense of periphery. So this entire black wall that you see is what kind of was holding the entire house and all these open and closed spaces together. And as you will see in the pictures, I used, there was this beautiful slate stone which is available just about 5 kilometers from the site. And in this sense, I was pretty lucky because the client himself is, he owns a marble godown, and we could get the kind of marble we wanted. In fact, the marble belt starts from here. It starts from Rajsaman. That's where most of your marble comes from. And unfortunately, this slate stone was used for infill of the plinth by most of the houses because they felt it's just one of those cheap throwaway stones, and no one paid any attention to that. And somewhere I felt that no, it could actually be used for construction. So the periphery that you see is actually made of this slate in the form of load-bearing construction using lime as the mortar. And inside, the gray walls are all brick walls which are plastered and lined with lime stucco, which is popularly known there as sandla. And the flooring, the dado, the staircase, parapets, bathrooms, kitchen, everything is made with one white, beautiful marble that you get there. Next, please. That's the first floor, because you can see 2 bedrooms on the first floor and 2 washrooms, and dining, which is double volume, the staircase, and the central core, which is double volume, and the air ducts on the entrance and the puja side. And the top and the bottom is essentially the courts. This court, and in a way, becomes a parking as well. Next, please. That's the terrace, which they still use at times during summers for sleeping and get-togethers. Next, please. Next. So that's a typical section taken through the staircase. That's the entrance court. That's the garden sort of a thing at the end of the house. And this is a section, that's a bridge that connects you to the bedrooms. That's a staircase, and that's dining. And that's how this entire thing opens out. Next, please. Next. That's a section taken through the courtyard towards the rear end. It's cutting through the washrooms. Next, please. That's through the staircase and air ducts and the bridge that connects the sleeping quarters on the top. Next, please. That's the elevation taken from the southern side. Next. That's an elevation from the northeast. That's from the southwest. Next. That's west. So these are some of the reference images of the local area around. There you have, this is the lake that I was talking about. It's called Nau Chowki. Chowki means pavilions. There were about 9 of them. 6 were kind of demolished during the invasion. And fortunately this year this water is right up to the top pavilion. This is typically how people build. They just see any solid material, whether it's brick or stone or marble, they just see it as a material which is more like an infill. Use cement, sand, and lime, and you get this beautiful palette, beautiful texture, and that's how most of the houses are around. And then this is the boundary wall of a godown where they just used the leftover marble blocks which was lying at the periphery and started building the wall on top. And what is something which we consider as luxury and something which is we all seek. This is exactly how the state is locally. It's beautiful. Next, please. And these are some of the local houses. These were about 78-year-old, and the one you see on the right is very modern, very clean, very minimal, and it's been built about 10 years back. And they don't finish the plaster; they just apply the plaster and leave it because of the roughness. It casts a lot of shadows, and that obviously is one of the things we seek for in this region. That's the kind of stone masonry, which is dry masonry. Just pick up from the site around the area and then build it. Next, please. some more images. And as we all know, not just Rajasthan but all over India, it's also colorful and so beautiful. And this is the street. And after doing so many projects on the sea, on the beach, and in the forest, and on the valleys, I got this project which I felt was something very real. It was surrounded by open gutters, narrow streets. There was this tabela right in front of the house. And yeah, next please. So these are some of the initial pictures when the foundation was going on. Now I'll run through the slides quickly. You'll get an idea of what the house looks like. Next please. So this is during the construction. I mean, I usually involve myself a lot with the construction, so I'm there on site pretty much, pretty frequently. So this is the time when I was, and I keep documenting the whole process. So this stone that you see is the stone which I mentioned about, slate, and it's local and it's dirt cheap. All you have to pay is the price of a tempo to deliver it to your site. That's about it. Next, please. And the entire site is so congested in terms of the space around that you literally had to climb on other buildings to be able to take some of these pictures. Next, please. Next. So that's the double volume in the core of the house where the staircase is going up, and the skylights, and that's the extreme slide is towards the garden, and that looks into the hills on the west. Next please. This is during the construction when they started laying the marble. Next. So now I guess these are mostly finished pictures. This was during 2015-2016 during monsoons. Next please. That's one of the elevations facing west. Next please. So there was a level difference in the site. From the back side to this front was about 8 feet drop. Next. So that's the stone, and it becomes completely black moment it rains, and it absorbs the water slightly and then it lets it out. And it has a certain amount of mica content which allows it to reflect the sun back. This kind of, even though it looks black and gray, it doesn't heat up the house. It in a way helps in reflecting the heat away. Next please. Next please. So that's the side lane, and that's where it connects the upper street to the lower one. Next please. That's from another house right behind, a shot taken, and as you can see the hills on the the horizon, and that's where most of the marble quarries are. Next please. That's taken in the evening, and as you can see the top two, these are the air ducts, and then you have a first terrace and the second terrace. This first terrace is used like a kitchen garden. And next please. So yeah, that's the entrance to the house. Next. That's the window which is looking out from the living room, and that window on top is a bedroom behind. Next please. This is a shot of the terrace taken from northeast. Next please. So that's the kitchen garden, that's the terrace on the first floor. Next. That's just a shot of the the air duct. Next please. Next. That's a little staircase that takes people directly onto the terrace in case they want to have a get-together or gathering or whatsoever. Next please. That's a shot of the courtyard or the garden towards the rear end. It's a common wall between the neighbors and this house. Next please. That's the cut in the opening which is looking towards west. Next please. So that's when you enter from here and you come inside, and what you see on the other edge is the staircase wall. And yeah, next. That's a little niche which looks into the office space, a small office space which could be used by the housewife or used for the tuition for the kids and stuff. Next please. So that's the double volume. which is at the core of the house, and this is where all the major activities happen. Formal living room is used for very formal occasions. Otherwise, this is where most of the stuff happens. So what could have been a court actually takes it does still happen in the center, but it's more covered, more protected, and much more cooler than most of the spaces. This is where the kids play, women folk sit down, get-togethers happen, and they are still used to sitting on the floor and eating. So even they wanted a dining table, most of the time when they have their lunch or dinner, they still sit on the floor, and it's very cool because it's all marble everywhere. Next, please. That's the staircase that takes you up, and then you have this skylight from the southern side. It casts beautiful, it's actually southwest. The skylight faces southwest, and then you have this amazing nuances of light, especially in the evening. And this entire railing is in marble again. Next, please. The same shot taken from the entrance of the bedroom below, and that's a window to the kitchen inside. Next, please. Same staircase. Next, please. So it's all cladded basically with the same marble, and this is another way where I took this entire thing on top. Next, please. There's a little window that's opened up towards the kitchen, and what you see at the far end is a puja room, and that's another shot, a close-up. Next, please. And this entire white surface behind the railing is what I mentioned earlier was lime stucco called as sandla, and it's pretty common and pretty cheap and is used widely in this region. Next, please. Next. That's a little shot of the living room, and that's the window which overlooks the street. Next, please. That's double volume dining which overlooks the court behind. Next, please. That's from dining looking back at the staircase. Next, please. That's as you climb the first floor, this becomes the bridge that connects the two bedrooms and takes you at both the ends into the first floor terrace, the kitchen garden. Next, please. So these are some of the shots taken from the first floor. That's an evening shot. Next, please. Next. That's between two bedrooms. There is a little sit out where you can sit, and you can also overlook the dining below. Next, please. I could afford to have these large openings even though it was Rajasthan because of the proximity of the wall that was so high and so close, and so fortunately I could save it from harsh sun or direct light, and it's resistant enough, about 4 feet. Next, please. And that's another door that takes you out on the terrace. Next, please. That's a shot as soon as you come out of the staircase and you look towards these, there are general storages for linen and stuff. On the right side is a similar shot, trying to capture the flight and the bridge. Next, please. Next. So that's one of the bedrooms, and then it has got this very linear ribbon window through which you can look at those hills right behind. Next. This is through the bedroom into the courtyard. Next. That's through the air duct. It's taken from the puja room.
Matthew Ghosh is an architect and designer. Based on her observations of life, objects around her, she is the co-founder of Matthew and Ghosh Architects and Anna, which is a woven steel accessory studio that customizes orders for sculpture, lights, and home accessories. During the design yatra, a very useful addition to the fabric of Bangalore.
See a lot of wall. We were also actively looking at this whole idea of how does one look critically at the climate of a place. Really understand the nuances of where the wind comes from, how does architecture respond to this, etc. Next, please. similar views, the whole idea of making reference to certain typologies of spaces, such as the veranda, or and sort of re-looking at that for the contemporary house. Next, please. This was a place of worship, and this was in a very ad hoc sort of a neighborhood where buildings were cheek by jowl, and our attempt was really to create public space outside and sort of develop the lower floor, which you don't see very well in this, as the first level of public space. The entire lower floor opens up to the outside street. Today, unfortunately, they've built walls. I don't think they're very comfortable with the idea of this, but it actually functioned like this for quite a few years. And it was lovely because the guys across the street, the chai wala, the people passing by, the auto rickshaw walas would come and sit on the plinth of this. And it had a very inclusive sort of sense of public space, which was actually institutional public space. Next, please. And again, the whole idea of using light to articulate what is private space, but yet collective space. So these were some of the explorations at that stage. Next, please. This is the Freedom Park project. Again, not running through the details, but really looking at when you have a certain typology which is very strong, how do you really... What was our approach? So we sort of felt very strongly that the whole thing of urban memory and the idea of not erasing, but really allowing the history of the city to speak for itself, not necessarily modifying it, but really anchoring onto it and allowing the different layers of history to really tell their own stories. So this is what we did. You had the old plan of the jail of Bangalore. This is Freedom Park. And we anchored certain very large